Hey, this is Suchu. I wanted to do a video between the round-robin group stage of StarSeries I-League Season 7 and the playoffs. I wanted to talk a bit about what I think about the matches, what I think about the teams leading up into the playoffs. And I guess I'll make a note of the format first. I think the format's been pretty good. Swiss group system, best of 3, get a shit ton of data. And nobody can complain about the results here, unlike like Blast, which is like a best of 1 2-day tournament. Just like one bad day at Blast and it's over for you. Whereas here you have to have 3 bad days, 3 bad series, and best of 3 series to get knocked out of a tournament. And so there's no excuses. Basically, what you get here is a very good indicator of where you are right now. So if you lose out, then you just weren't good enough, and that's been the case with teams like FaZe or MIBR. And I'm not going to go too deep into that, just because it probably deserves its own video or own article, whatever. So let's move on to the playoffs. Playoffs themselves, I don't really like the lack of seeding here, because I think the 3 best teams are all in the lower bracket: Renegades, Na'Vi, or ENCE. Probably should rethink that. Steal IM Katowice's ELL system or whatever. But for now, it is what it is. So let's look into the matches. Energy versus Vitality. Now, Energy, this is the first tournament I've seen them play at. And what I mean by that is, like, it's the first tournament I've seen them play at with Tarek, because I don't watch online matches, so I don't really have a good gauge of what exactly has changed in the lineup since Tarek has replaced Fugly. Based off of the series and games I've seen, which is like most or all of them, I think they lost a sense of stability in the team by kicking out Fugly, and they've increased their overall ceiling with Tarek. And it makes a lot of sense if you just think about the individual play styles of those two players. Like, even when they play similar roles, and they do a lot of the time on the T side, outside of Dust 2. Basically, Fugly was a stable, consistent role player. And what I mean by that is, like, when we talk about the role system, I've always said it was like a direction rather than definition. In Fugly's case, it was closer to a definition than a direction. He was always playing the same style of play consistently throughout every single match. Now, he could hit his shots, he could not hit his shots, it didn't matter. But in terms of position, in terms of timing, in terms of how he worked with his team, he was always putting out the exact same level of performance. He was never wavering between like 10 out of 10 to 5 out of 10 to 3 out of 10 to 10 out of 10 from each match. With Fugly, it was either 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, or 9 out of 10. And he's a very small scale, but as time went on, that scale started to go down lower, or as teams figured it out, or perhaps he reverted back to his mean in terms of skill. So that's kind of how I've modeled this Energy team. They're way more. They don't have a true base of. They don't have like a true average. And is that the right word I want to use? Well, basically, just by removing Fugly and putting in Tarek, like, it's become a lot more chaotic. But it's also increased their playmaking potential. I'd say not as much on the T side, even though like Tarek gets a lot more freedom, a lot more laissez-faire, a lot more chance to express himself compared to when he was playing for MIBR. But overall, I think their CT side's been a lot more aggressive with the inclusion of Tarek, and he does add like a wildcard element, which was something the old Energy lacked. Like, the old Energy was very aggressive, and they can make very wild calls based off of whatever Daps was calling on the CT side or T side. But they didn't make surprising moves, surprising ballsy moves, like jumping through the smoke or playing off of instinct the way I think Tarek does. So I think he certainly adds something to the team, but as to whether or not that'll be worth it in the end, only time will tell. Because I think, no, actually, time won't tell, I guess. I think the old Energy lineup had already run its course by the end. So I think this was the right move, but time will tell as to whether or not this 5-man lineup will continue to work as is, or if they'll need to make another change in the future. I guess we'll have to see how much they get punished for adding this chaotic element and removing like a consistent element in their team. The biggest change for me, though, outside of the difference between Fugly and Tarek, is their map pool change, or perhaps their philosophy on map veto. Like, when you look throughout all of these matches at StarSeries, the biggest thing you should notice about NRG is they haven't played Overpass. And Overpass was the map that they made their name off of, and it's always been Daps' specialty map, in my opinion. If you look at like a majority of his best lineups, they've all played Overpass, right? And this one has yet to play it. And in the first iteration of NRG with Fugly, they used to be their first go-to map and was their international, like, oh, we'll always get a win on this map kind of deal as their home map. Whereas in this tournament, they've been reverting a lot more to Inferno overall. And I don't know if that's because they want to hide it or because they're just not as confident or as good on it or what the exact deal is with that. But in any case, I think they're going to have to play it against Vitality eventually. So they'll have to play it eventually, right? Like, you can't fucking avoid that map forever. So we'll see. Then I think that's like the last piece of information I need before I come to a conclusion about NRG and NRG as a team. As for Vitality, they've made a lot of changes again, and I guess this is like a French thing. Like, I know MEK, Apex, they all rightly criticized Shox for his leadership style in the G2 super team, French super team, because Shox basically was very inconsistent in terms of what he wanted to do with the team, in terms of identity, in terms of strategy, in terms of roles or whatever. And because he kept switching things, there was never a consistent base. And I feel like that's kind of happening again with Vitality. And it's basically not necessarily confirmed, but basically NBK came out with an interview with StarLadder talking about how Alex is now the in-game leader for the T side and he's doing the CT side calling. And while that's fine for now, like, I think he needed to stick with it even if they were losing, because if NBK wants to be a good in-game leader, he has to fail, and then he has to fail, because that's the only way he reaches success is by failing and learning from those mistakes instead of swapping it around again. But we'll see how it moves going forward, because technically it's possible to juggle the in-game leadership role like the way Taz and Neo did it in Virtus Pro. I just don't think that's going to work for Vitality in general. Now, in terms of other things they've changed, they've basically taken ZywOo off of the op duties for Mirage and Inferno. And the reason they did that was because MBK is like, yeah, it's more of a supportive role. So we don't really want that for ZywOo. We want him to be in the action. And in order to do that, I'll take up the op role, and I'll take up the op role, make the space, drain out the utility, and then when they come to ZywOo on a site, he'll get 1 or 2 kills almost guaranteed. Makes sense, I think, for Inferno, because Inferno is a very different map compared to the rest. I'm not so certain about Mirage. I think Mirage is still a map where a superstar opper can make incredible impact. I'm thinking of Oscar, Chris J, Simple, all of them do fucking fantastic things. Device as well, right? So I'm kind of on board with it half-half. I think they need to revisit Mirage. But the reason I'm bringing up this interview is basically another criticism, I think, for strategically for Vitality is Vitality still haven't yet accepted the fact that actually maybe basically I don't think they've all-in enough on ZywOo. Like, they know ZywOo is their best player, but they haven't constructed strategically their identity around ZywOo in a way I think they should. Because the way they're playing CS right now, it's more similar to Happy and Shock style than it is to Existence Kenny S style. And I think when you look at the makeup of the teams, like if NBK was trying to learn from history, I'd say he should be looking at teams like the Guardian Zeus lineup of Na'Vi, the Fallen lineup with Luminosity and Kaboom when he was the primary opper and playing around him, or the Existence Kenny S style Titan style, where it was clearly the Opera was clearly the best player in the team, or the one getting the picks, and then you basically set up the map, you take map control, you give this guy as much space as you can to get a pick, and then you play off of the power play situation. They don't do that. Vitality just don't do that. They just play basically happy, not purely happy style, but like, more typical CS 4-1s and all that, 4-1s, 1-3-1s, defaults, fairly like meta things, but I don't think that's the way they should have gone with this lineup. But to be fair, I think Vitality still are doing pretty decently relative to the world. Like, well, I don't think that, like, I think the top 10 teams are a bit of a mess, but Vitality is basically proving they are top 10 team at this point, or close to it. So fair enough. If it's working, can't really be that argumentative about it. Now, in terms of the head-to-head, I think Energy is just light years ahead here. Like, if I'm looking at the skill, Energy is already way more skilled than Vitality. I think Breezy is basically the best NA player outside of Liquid. Ethan is pretty close up following him. Tarek's form has revived. Daps has had a surprisingly good tournament here. Cirque, even if I don't think he's that great of an opper in the recent months, or just straight up terrible if you're looking at the major, he does hit the consistent shots you need for an opera, unlike like Draken, right? So I think overall Energy will have a field day against Vitality. Like, I could see Vitality taking maybe one map, but I can't see them taking two. So I have Energy taking this quarterfinals. Next, I have Fnatic versus North. And Fnatic have basically resurrected themselves from the dead. Everybody was kicking them when they were down. Well, actually, they were kicking themselves when they were down, right? They were, what was it? They were seeded number 1 in the major, like, I think it was, I forget what it's called now, Legend stage, I think. And then they got trounced by, no, it was probably the Challenger stage, because they got trounced by Vici, who seeded them lower, right? I remember now. And so since then, Fnatic has been terrible, but at this tournament, they've turned it all around. And this tournament kind of confirms the central problem with Fnatic. They don't have a very good leader or very good system. I think everything Fnatic does depends entirely on the individual players of the day. And it helps that Crims is a god again, and it helps that Twist has been fairly good, and Brolan's been on and off. Like, I think those are the three players. If you want to figure out how Fnatic is going to do, you figure out how those three players are going to do. Is A, is Crims a god? Yes. B, is Twist having a good day or a bad day? C, how good is Brolan on the day? And then I guess D would be like JW, because he's pretty on and off as well as a aggressive rifler, but I feel like JW is way more off than on lately, so he's not necessarily a win condition for me. He's more like a bonus if he shows up. And that's kind of the problem with Fnatic, is in terms of team structure, in terms of tactics, I don't think they have it. I don't think this team is going to go that far overall in the overall world rankings. Like, I think they have a very good ceiling for upsetting teams. I don't think they have a very good floor for becoming a consistent top 4, top 5 team in the world. Like, I don't think they have it in them. And so this makes this particular matchup interesting, because I think if Fnatic hit their floor, then North can beat them. And as for North themselves, they're very similar to Fnatic in that they have a horrendous floor, but decent-ish ceiling. The difference is, like, the perception of North is a lot worse than it is for Fnatic, because people like to meme on North a lot more. And to be fair, like, a lot of their losses are memeable, are meme-worthy. Like, they have had some terrible losses, but they're still a top 10 team in the world, right? Or around thereabouts. And I think Valde is still one of the best players in the world. I think that's inarguable at this point. He's shown himself time and time again to be incredibly consistent, incredibly impactful. Does basically almost everything you want out of a rifler. Like, so he's been great. I think AZ's been turning his form around. I think he's been very good as a secondary option for the team. And then Kirby's been on and off. Cadian's been on and off. Gade does his role. In terms of skill, it's not too bad if, like, while Fnatic are definitely ahead, it's not too, the difference isn't too huge for North. But the killer for me, I think, is like North's playstyle is going to run directly into Fnatic's. Like, Cadian likes to run a bunch of very fast plays, very aggressive plays, very, I don't know if you want to call it scrimmy, because it's pretty clear they've practiced a lot of their fast executes, but certainly it's certainly not like the best way I could put it is it doesn't feel like each of the rounds are connected in a very well thought out manner. The way, like, I think like a Prime God B, a Prime Fallen, or a Prime Glaive would, like, those guys set up rounds so like the first like 3 or 4 rifle rounds will set up like a 5th, 6th round, which will set up like 8th, 9th round. Like North, it's like there isn't a consistent plan that strings together all of their entire T side half, right? I guess that's the difference for me, and it hasn't changed much. So if they're running this kind of, they're going to run this kind of style against Fnatic, and I think they're going to get punished for it. So I think overall Fnatic are just the better team. I have Fnatic like, God, I really don't want to. Yeah, I think Fnatic probably favorites of like 55-45 thereabouts, and I think Fnatic win this either 2-0 or 2-1. I think overall the skill, I think overall the skill will just come out on top for Fnatic, and I really just like North do some good things, but like I think they're just as inconsistent as Fnatic, but their value of scale is just lower. Like Fnatic's like here, and then North is like here. So yeah, there's a very thin line where, not very thin, but yeah, this general area where Fnatic simultaneously has to play a bit lower in terms of individual skill. North has to play a bit higher. So overall, I think Fnatic will win that. Renegades versus NIP. This is a funny one to me, because I think if you're looking at paper, NIP in terms of skill challenges Renegades. Think Forest, Get Right, Rez, Draken, Licro, all 5 of them, man for man, are more skilled than all the Renegades players except for maybe JKS, right? But in terms of actualized skill, I think Renegades trounces NIP almost in every position, because their system and their tactics and their team play are such that every player has a distinct role, and every player knows how to play the role, and because of that, they look way better. They can play to the maximum potential, and they show it all in the server. It's why JKS, I think, is going to go down as like a top 10 to top 20 player this year, maybe even higher, depending on how long Renegades can keep this up. NIP, on the other hand, their problem is their potential on paper has never converted to potential in reality. It's just what could be, but what isn't, right? Like outside of Forrest, who I think has like the only roles that make sense for him, nobody else is really playing their best roles. Get Right isn't. Rez basically isn't. Like it's hard for me to know about Rez because he's always been like more of a role player than a star on this team, but he's always done it very well enough that people consider him like one of the stars on the team. Draken's always been Draken, like on and off. Like, I'll hit the crazy shots. I'll miss the stable, consistent shots. Fairly similar to Henny in that way. Lecro, I think his individual form has continued to fall off as an in-game leader. And in terms of in-game leadership, I think NIP is very binary. They either default, and if that works, they continue with it. If it doesn't work, they revert to a execute or a set play. And when that doesn't work, they revert back to the default. So they're pretty easy. They're pretty easy to figure out for a very tactical team like Renegades. So I don't think Renegades will have that much of a problem. Whereas I think Renegades themselves as a team, like Kassad Azure team up is doing wonders for this team. Like every time I see them play in the server, I think in terms of the T side, I think, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Wow, that was a good way to take a map control. Wow, that was a good execute. Or wow, that was like perfect timing. Or unlike like the North Canadian example, I think when I analyze a Renegades T side, what they're doing throughout the entire half strings together perfectly. Like, not perfectly, but pretty close to it. Like, they'll run a set play, and then they get the information, and then based off of that information, Azure or Kassad or the system, whatever is going on, figures out what the next play should be, and the next play should be after that, and then they can kind of read the momentum of the team, and then call something else. Like, they kind of understand how to set up a future round that will increase their probability of winning that future round. So I guess they're better at grinding than NIP is. That's a better way to put it. So I think overall, Renegades team play tactically, they just outmatch NIP. NIP had the skill, sure. And then the final thing you have to think about is the map pool. I think Renegades have a far better map pool than NIP. NIP don't even have like a home map right now where I can think in my mind, oh, they're gonna guarantee to win this. No, I don't think that's the case. I think Renegades has a chance to beat them on every map in the map pool, basically. So overall, Renegades taking this 2-0. Yeah, I think I'll go with 2-0. Last playoffs is Na'Vi versus ENCE. And this is the rematch of the semifinals on the major. A fantastic series. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. Basically, ENCE topple Na'Vi in what may become a symbolic change of the guard, perhaps. We'll see how it goes. But basically, Simple was a god, and here's how I'd frame it. Simple was a god on that third map on Mirage against ENCE, but ENCE were a better team. They were better tactically, and 5 could beat 1 on that day, even though that 1 tried really fucking hard, right? And so that's kind of and even though there are a lot of change factors here, for instance, at that major run, I think X7 way overperformed and Sergey underperformed. Since then, they've both reverted back to the mean. So Sergey's once again a star player, putting out star numbers. X7, his frags are lower, but he clearly plays a role, clearly has impact in the team, clearly he's doing his job very well. So in terms of skill differential, I don't think ENCE will have changed too much. As for Na'Vi, they're very on and off on any given day. Every single time. Zeus and Edward, like, they're bad, but 1 out of 3 tournaments in the playoffs, they'll show up. And I don't know if this is going to be that 1 out of 3. My guess is not, because, 66% chance that tells me it's not going to happen, but it might happen. And Edward himself has actually been doing pretty decently throughout this tournament, from what I've seen. The bigger factor to think about is probably Flamey. I'm not certain if he'll become consistent. I don't think he will be. But he did pretty good at the major. As for Electronic, he's basically... Electronic has this weird image. What's that image? What the word I want to use? Okay, basically I think Electronic's a bit overrated. And the reason I think that is because people still talk about him as if he is that superstar player of summer 2018, where he was legitimately like a top 5 player and somebody who could rival Simple. He hasn't been like that for 6-7 months now, I think. I think he's just a good player, a star player, certainly, but not a superstar player, not somebody that I think, oh, if you get this guy, he could be the best player in the world. Like, I don't think Electronic is at that level anymore. So because of that, more burden is put onto Simple and the others to carry that extra weight. And that's something you have to consider, is the fact that Simple is still defying my expectations, because it's been over an year and a half at this point that Simple has reached this, or it's been close to an year and a half that Simple has reached this godhood peak of skill, and it hasn't slowed down yet. Like, he's had some off games, like at the major, but then he just comes back and like fucking kicks ass at this event. So I think the exact same narrative is going to run here for not Na'Vi versus ENCE. I just think, analytically speaking, you're going to run to the exact same question of, okay, Simple's going to show up, ENCE is going to show up. Here's the question for Na'Vi: do the other 4 how are the other four on the day? How's the team play on the day? How are the tactics on the day? Because Zeus, you might be critical of his individual form, sure. But in terms of tactically, he's also very inconsistent. Like, sometimes he does very well, sometimes he doesn't. And it's very hard to know which Zeus you're going to get on a day, either tactically or individually. If he does show up, then yeah, I think Na'Vi are highly favored in that scenario. But if he doesn't, maybe Simple will win, right? Now, in terms of the last thing to consider for this particular matchup is map veto. I don't think Na'Vi is particularly great at map vetoing. I actually think they're the worst. I think they should float cash against Ents because Ents don't play cash. Like, I'm not certain why they banned it at the major. If they do that, then I would favor Na'Vi definitively. I'd say like 60-40. But because I know Zeus is Zeus, I think he's going to ban it. And so that lowers the chances down for me like 50-50. And at that point, you come into the same conundrum I started at the beginning. Is it simple or 5? 5 or simple, right? Like, I think overall, I think I'm gonna have to go with Na'Vi for this one. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to go with Na'Vi for this one. Even though I'm being pretty critical of them overall, like, the only team that can there's only 2 teams that can really exploit Na'Vi currently for their weaknesses in terms of their inconsistency. Astralis almost always do it. Liquid almost always do it. Outside of that, yeah, nobody else really can exploit them consistently. Like, Edward and Zeus can have bad games, sure. They can drop series and maps in group stages, sure. Everybody else, but in elimination matches and playoffs, they've only really lost to, like, North at the ice thing, which I don't think they really took that seriously, and it ends at the major, which they obviously took very seriously. But overall, like, I think Na'Vi is still a pretty solid team, and with Simple being more motivated, with Na'Vi having had the chance now to play Ents head to head on a big stage like that, to figure out what Ents are about. Because I think Ents is a pretty I don't want to say static, but what they're doing is very, very stylistic. I don't know if stylistic is the word I want to use. Well, basically, Ents have a certain philosophy behind everything they do. Like, just the roles they play, the style. Like, they are very, very similar to Astralis in terms of philosophy. Ents are, like, everybody has a set role that they generally try to keep throughout all of the different maps, and it seems to be working. So if Na'Vi has studied that, and I think they would have, given the fact that they lost, given that this is the rematch, I think Na'Vi versus Ents, I think Na'Vi will have done enough homework, or at least Simple will have done enough homework to figure out those cracks, figure out how to beat Ents, and I think Ents themselves will have a harder time containing Simple, and a harder time just in general with Na'Vi this time around because of that factor. So I am picking Na'Vi. All right, those are my predictions for the quarterfinals. As for the semifinals, let's see here. Because of the way the scheduling works out, I probably can't do a video because I think it's like 3 quarterfinals on one day, then a quarterfinal and 2 semifinals on the next day. So I'll just predict the semifinals and then the finals. Fuck it. So Energy versus Fnatic would be my upper semifinals. I don't think Tarek is going to change Energy fundamentally so much that they're going to get over their whole choking thing. Fnatic themselves, when they're on, they're on. When they're off, they're off. I think Fnatic will probably... Yeah, I think Fnatic will probably win that head-to-head. I'm basing this off of their individual form throughout this tournament. As long as Brolan and Twist help Crims, I think they should be able to win that. As for the semifinals, it would be Renegades versus Na'Vi. I think Na'Vi is going to win that also for basically the same reasons as Ents, but Yeah, I think it's. Yeah, I think it'll be. I think it'll be a very, 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 very close one, and I think Navi will end up just winning this tournament, which sets up a terrible, terrible piece of history where Navi win another tournament without Astralis in it. Navi convince themselves not to change the lineup, and then Navi go to a tournament with Astralis in it, and Navi get banged out. I suppose the better timeline would be if Ents or Renegades win this, because if Ents or Renegades win this, then this will force the other teams to really take into consideration what they're doing in terms of teams, balance, systems, all of that. I think they're two of the better teams on the rise up now. I think they're basically following in the steps of teams like Astralis and Liquid. So I really hope they do well, but who knows? All right, that's about it. See you guys later.